Happy Friday, everyone. This is Jen Lee. I'm here with Rakesh, David, and Kartik, and we're here for our 30th Automation Hour webinar series.
Oh.
So for those who are joining us who are new, we do mute all lines. So if you have questions about Kartik's presentation as he goes along, or you have a general process automation question, do post that to the chat function. And if we're not able to get to your question during today's session, do continue on posting that to our Trailblazer community Salesforce Automation Hour. We will post the recording as well as the link to the deck on our website, automationhour.com, on the YouTube channel, our Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour, as well as we'll communicate out via Twitter too. So we are in our third session in our intermediate series with Kartik today, and then we're going to wrap it up on December 1st with Megan Broadkey, and then we're going to go into our advanced series to wrap that up in 2018. I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io, for sponsoring this free webinar series for the community. And here is an updated picture of David, Rakesh, and I from Dreamforce 17 just last week. So with that, I am very excited to have a fellow Boston MVP on Automation Hour today, Kartik. And with that, let me hand it over to him.
Thank you, Jen. That was awesome. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak at the Automation Hour. All the stuff that you have been doing is amazing. I'm looking forward to contributing in any way possible in the future as well. A little bit about me. My name is Kartik Viswanadha. So I work at a startup company called Neuroflash. We are a trusted AI advisor for our customers. So we are in the AI space combined with Salesforce Einstein, and also doing some more interesting projects on things like chatbots, Service Cloud, Sales Cloud, analytics as well. I have been a Salesforce MVP since 2014. I run the Boston Developer Group. So if you are in the area, and if you're not part of the developer group, so I would highly recommend suggest you to join the group and take part in the events and come and meet me in person, say hello, hi. I'm looking forward to meeting all the new developers and admins in the area. My Twitter handle is @logontokartik. And like other stuff, I have like 14 certifications. I did my analytics brown belt certification as well. So with that, let's jump on to the main topic of today. Today on a Friday, beautiful Friday evening. So I wanted to talk about using login flows in Salesforce using the visual flow. This is primarily focused through the demos. So I'm going to present you a few demos on how to use the login flows, and then maybe take like a little over 30 to 40 minutes, and then I will open up the quorum for the questions that you might have for the last 10 to 15 minutes. Feel free to post your questions onto the GoToWebinar so that we can have all the questions in line, and we'll take over all those things at the end of my demos. So today's agenda is fairly straightforward. So I'm going to talk briefly about what login flows are. I'm going to do like 3 demos to demonstrate the capabilities of the login flows, define what a login flow is and configure it, give an example, some real-time use cases and scenarios about when to use the login flows, and go a little more into using the login flows with Apex plugins. And then we'll have a recap and a question Q&A. So login flows, what are login flows? Login flows are nothing but the visual flows, the actual flows that you use today in Salesforce. At the end of the day, they are the login flows. but the reason why they are called login flows is because they are tied to the login event of a user in Salesforce. So what that means is that they're basically playing an intermediary role between user entering his username and password and then logging into the home page of the Salesforce. So these flows come into action in between those two events, and they are tied to a specific profile. And again, as I said, they happen or they came in between the user login event. So let's just jump straight into the demo into the Salesforce org and see how the login flow looks like. And I'll be talking through as I show you and navigate through the screens. And if you have any issues with the GoToWebinar, sometimes you might have some issues looking at what I'm showing and all. Just close the browser and reopen it again, and you should be able to see if you see like a screen is stuck or something like that. So this is a usual Salesforce org. You log in and then you can see a Salesforce org. Let's go into the setup. And if you search for the flows, you can see under the security controls, you have login flows, and under the workflows and approvals, you have flows. So the reason why this is set up like this is because login flows, again, as I said, are tied to the login event. And if you wanted to enhance the login functionality of a user based on multiple use cases, you'll be building these things. Click on the login flow, and this is where you define what a login flow is. When you click on the new, what it is doing is it is providing us the ability to use an existing flow that is already created as a login flow. So I have like 5 or 6 flows in my org that I created. So I'm using one of the flows. I'm calling it. So I'm using the accept terms of service. I'm giving it a name. Let me. Platform profile. So what I'm doing is I'm choosing the user license to which this flow needs to be tied, and then the profile which needs to be tied. And this checkbox, this is something new. There is a, if you have noticed, for all the flows, existing flows, there is something called as a lightning runtime. What lightning runtime will allow you to do is basically render the user experience in the lightning experience. So the same way you can do that as well for the login flows. You can render the flow in the lightning runtime. I saved this one. So now if I am a user with that particular profile, the standard platform user profile, what's going to happen is when I try to log in into Salesforce, it's going to fire or trigger off this accept terms of service flow. Let's see the demo of how it looks like, and then I'll show you. So I have a user, this one. So I go, so look at this one. This changed a bit. I mean, something happened here, right? I mean, I typed in my username and password. Ideally, I need to jump directly into my Salesforce org, the homepage. But in something happened, and this one shows up like Acme Corporation, welcome to Acme, and the privacy and copyright protection. And there is this checkbox that I need to click accept, and then click on next. Well, I think I have both. The authenticator app thing that I'm gonna hold off on the authenticator app for now. Let me actually do one thing. I'm gonna talk about it just in 15 minutes on what that is, authenticator app is. But let's try this again. So now I just jumped straight into Salesforce. So I clicked on like accept terms and conditions checkbox, and now it allowed me into Salesforce. Let's see what this looks like in the flow. So if I go back to my flows, the one that we just saw is accept terms of service. I open the flow and let's see how it looks like. It's a straightforward flow. I mean, if you are familiar, this is an intermediate session. So if you are familiar with how the flows work, all the different things that are present in the flow, that constructor flow, like the elements, the screens, the decisions and all, it's the same thing with the login flows. So there is a screen that is present here, welcome screen, which is basically a big chunk of text. And you see like all the stuff that we just saw, like Acme Corporation and all. And then there is the checkbox accept. And then there is a decision tree. The decision tree, what the decision is basically doing is, it is checking to see if the user clicked on the accept checkbox. And only if the user is clicking on the accept checkbox, and when you click on the next, that's when it is completing the flow. So what that means is it is completing the flow and allowing the user to log into Salesforce. If he did not click the accept checkbox, it is going back to the welcome screen again. So until the user clicks on that checkbox, it keeps on repeating, it keeps on showing that welcome screen again and again. So it will not allow the user to log into Salesforce. This is like one of the simplest use cases of using a flow for the login purposes. If you think from the business standpoint, what this means and how we can leverage some of these capabilities is definitely, if you talk to a security person, they will have a lot of thoughts around this one, right? Okay, Salesforce already has something called as like mobile verification. They do that, right? I mean, if you log in from like a new IP address, it gets you can sign up for register for a mobile verification through email, or a verification through email or through SMS. Today Salesforce out of the box has these capabilities, but if you wanted to take it to like the next level by providing some sort of a time-based verification where you get like a key code that is tied to one of your authenticator apps, and then you have to put in that number, you can do that. Also, there are some use cases where you wanted to, today in Salesforce there is a limitation where a user, when he logs in, nothing gets tracked. So a login time is not generally tracked anywhere in Salesforce. The logout time does, but not the login time. So what you can do is you can write things like creating some sort of an object in this flow that will allow you to create a new record whenever the user is logging in. Some of the things that login flows have access to are like the login flows does not have access to everything in Salesforce. It's very limited. So you'll have access to user, and then you have to use the profile settings to make sure that if you're giving an access to like any custom option and all, you have access through the profile settings as well. So let's look at a little more complex example. So this is like the simplest example where you are allowing the user to log in. So let's look at a little more intermediate example. Let me see. So I'm going to show an example where when a user is logging in, we will be sending a code in an email, and the user needs to type in the code so that the user gets into the Salesforce. So to do that, there is another flow that is created. So this is a flow where we are looking up the user information, we are getting the email address of the user, and then we are generating a random code and sending that random code in an email. And when the user types in that random code, we are validating that code to make sure that whatever user is typing in is valid or not. The first element that we see here is a fast lookup. So we have the user ID. So what we do is we query the user object to get the email address. It's a straightforward fast lookup. And there are some out-of-the-box fields that are available in the login flows that are prefixed with the login flow underscore. Things like the user ID, the profile ID, the session ID. So there are like 10 fields or so that are available, and I can send you a list, or I'll share the list with you all, where you can use those and you can get some information without querying any object in Salesforce. So when you query, you check at the email. There is a validation to see if the email is valid or not, email is present or not for that user object. And if the email is present, this is a simple plugin that generates a random code. Nothing fancy. It just uses a mat.random function and generates a random code. And this is a quick action in the flows that is available, that is sending an email address. That is sending an email to that email address. So it's saying is the target is the source. It's saying that this is your code, and the random code that we generate, subject is hello. Nothing fancy over here again. The part that is very interesting is making sure that the code that the user is typing in is the right code or not. So the way we are doing it is again using the flow magic. There is nothing special here from the login flow standpoint. We are asking the user to input the code that was received in the email. So he puts in the code. We are making sure that we check the code is equal to code input. And if the code is equal to code input, the finish step or the last step in the flow is basically allowing the user to go into the home screen. If the code is not valid, it is going back to the code generator to generate a random code and to send an email. So let's test it out and see how this one will look like. Again, it's the same process. We go to the flows, go to the login flow, choose the one email confirmation, save it. Okay. So it says that the verification code was sent. I think I got my code on my email. I'm checking on my mobile. So I put in the code, and then I am straight into the Salesforce org. So there isn't any like magic here, right? I mean, it's all built into the flows. So that's a second use case where you can use the login flows to basically build some sort of authentication, or like a two-factor authentication, as they say, is like making sure that we authenticate not only using the password but also using like an email address also. The third use case, this is like at the enterprise level, right? So if you at the enterprise levels, what generally happens is, if you look at any of the two-factor authentication security mechanisms, there is always this concept or notion of time-based authentication, where you'll have an authenticator app, you authorize using the authenticator app, and then you'll be getting a code that is valid for like X amount of seconds, and then you have to put in the code almost immediately, or like you'll be getting a new code. So that's for the high secure. Think of them in like healthcare scenarios, or scenarios where your users are looking at the sensitive information in Salesforce. Most of the times, some of those measures are required, And using this concept of the login flows, we can pretty much automate a lot of those things. And then we can also integrate it with like third-party providers who are providing the ability for us to send SMS messages or send like one-time passwords and all. Like there is a company that Salesforce recommends or like talks about in all their documentation is called the Ukibo. Ukibo is it's a company that like has like these key codes that will automatically generate like a key every time, and then you input that key information as after the password as a two-factor authentication mechanism, and then you are authenticated. You can use the Ukibo services. You can call the Ukibo services from the login flows using the Apex code through the Apex plugins, and then you can randomly generate the key and validate it from there. So we'll be looking at one of the examples that talk about the similar concept, but using the Salesforce Authenticator app. And the first and the foremost thing that we need to do for the Salesforce Authenticator app or the 2FA to work is set the security level for the user to high assurance. And the way you do that is at the profile level. So I go to the profile. Generally, it's at the bottom. All the security related stuff. What is it? So this is the one, session settings. Click on the edit. So whenever I'm setting that security level, login to higher assurance, what's going to happen is, so this is where it gets complex, right? Because now we are getting into Apex code. So the Apex code, there is a Salesforce Apex class called auth. It's a parent class, and then you have all these different methods that the class provides as a part of their auth.session management. And you can actually use some of those classes to validate your two-factor authentication. But the Apex class that I wanted to talk about is like object that I want to talk is two-factor info. So this one is populated only if that value is set to high assurance. So all that information. So we need to make sure that at the profile level we populate this thing like two-factor. We set that value to high assurance. And once you set it to high assurance, what's going to happen is all these records are populated in these standard objects, and then these Apex classes that Salesforce is providing, this all start working. So let me open up a flow that talk about it. So there is an Apex class called ToTP Plugin, and this is available in GitHub. So you can always get this class if you want to. But what this class does is, this is the class that I'm talking about. It implements the process.plugin interface. So for any Apex class to be used from within a flow, we have to implement this interface. The interface name is process.plugin. And once you implement this interface, all the variables that you are using in the flows can be passed back and forth. And in order for us to do that, we set the input parameters and output parameters. So you can see that there are input parameters that are set here and the output parameters that are being sent to the flow. So we implement this class, we send the output parameters, and the flow actually gathers that output parameters. and then it presents the user with the QR codes and then the inputs to the one-time password. So let's see what this does. Again, it is querying the two-factor authentication object for that particular user, checking to see if that user is set up for the two-factor authentication or not. And if the user is not set up for the two-factor authentication, it is providing a QR code, a code that can be scanned by the authenticator app to set you up with the two-factor authentication. Once the authenticator app registers your user for that instance, now the authenticator app codes are valid across. So whenever you log into Salesforce, you can open up the authenticator app, and then you get this code that you can just directly put in into that Salesforce login screen. And then it is passing in the registration input, which is basically the one-time password code, and then it is verifying to make sure that the one-time password code is valid or not. So let's so you can see the reason why it is present in two places. The first place is for the first step, to make sure that the user is tied to the authenticator app. If it is not tied to the authenticator app, it is getting you the registration screen that will contain the QR code. You can see that's image source is equal to QR URL. It renders the QR, and then you scan using your authenticator app this QR code. And once you scan the QR code, you can basically put in the one-time password. So that's this. It's the same plugin called again, but it is this time it is validating that password that you are putting in. And now once it is validated, the session is logging you in, and you're good there. That's basically what it is doing. And if you're already registered, this step is being skipped. You can see that this screen does not show up if you're already registered. So in this decision, it shows you like you're already registered. If you're not registered is false, then it is taking you to the registration step. If not, it is taking you to the one-time password step. So let me actually do one thing. I'm gonna what was SFT OTP. So my user is already registered with the Authenticator app, so it's not showing me the QR code. But what I need to do is I need to go to the Authenticator app and then put in the key. You cannot see it. I'm opening up my mobile device. So I'm just putting in the token from the Authenticator app. What just happened? I think I put the wrong one. Oh. So yep, I logged in. Let me see if I can create a separate user. So now you can see even on the registration process before I'm setting up this one, it is asking me to scan the barcode. You can see how first time user logging in, he's not set up for the authentication. It is showing up the barcode. But once the user is tied to the authentication app, there are multiple authentication apps. I use the Google Authenticator, but there is also a Salesforce Authenticator app. Once the user is tied to the Authenticator app, all you have to do is every time you just have to keep adding just the code, and that's pretty much it. So I just scanned it. So let me add the code now. See, it looks like the code got expired. Now it's asking me to set up the new password because it's a new user. And I'm logged in. Oh, that's interesting. So it's logging me into Salesforce. And you can also see that I got an email saying that the new verification method was added from the authentication app. So in a nutshell, the ability for us to change the way the user is logging into Salesforce is through the login flows. And again, the login flows have a lot more capabilities, much more complex capabilities. You just saw a couple of them. And you also saw like the idea where you're using an Apex class, a plugin, and then hooking up the plugin to the flows, and then driving how the login process works. Let me go back to my presentation. We talked about login flow usage, login flows with Apex. So that's pretty much it from the login flow standpoint. There are again like a lot of complex use cases where you can use these examples and build like some really complex integrations to your authentication service providers like Okta or Yukibo or like some other providers. And you can also do a lot of other things as through the flows intermediary. So again, like login flows are nothing but visual flows. They are it's a very powerful feature that will help you on how to change the user logs based on the profile. It is easily customizable. So if you wanted to make a change to your text, or if you want to make a change to your screen, it's like super simple. You don't need to write like lines of Apex code to do that. But for the advanced use cases, you have the ability to use the Apex plugins to do some of these things. And obviously ability to leverage the third-party connectors. So with that, so I'll open the quorum. I know we cruised through some of these things, so I'll open the quorum for any question and answers.
All right. So Kimberly has a question. Can login flows be used in the communities for self-registration and login?
They can be, yes. So the login flows can be used to the community because they are tied to a profile. So generally the communities are also tied to the profile. So if you can still see my screen. So if I have a community profile user license, if I choose them customer community login and all, I choose the right profile. You can use the login flows in the communities as well. Okay,
Gil is wondering if you've seen performance issues with login flows in Lightning.
Honestly, I have not implemented login flows in Lightning. So it's the runtime is the Lightning runtime. What that basically means, it's just the UI piece. everything else, the backend engine that is still running is the flow engine. So I don't anticipate any performance issues using the login flows. But again, like I cannot comment specifically on Lightning because I have not built anything in Lightning for the login flows.
Okay. And Rick is asking if you can post that random generated code with test class. So maybe we could do like a managed package or unmanaged package after the fact, and then we'll include that in our posting.
Sure, there is already a GitHub repo. So yeah, I'll share the GitHub repo or the unmanaged package, whichever works.
Okay, great. Sarah had a question. Does single sign-on impact this at all?
Impact this one, like it's a very good question. So when you talk about single sign-on, the single sign-on concept has a lot more capabilities. Like you can use the single sign-on using your totally different identity provider, right? Where Salesforce is not an identity provider for you, but it's someone else. So you need to understand how that flow works like, and then define the flow, and then see if this fits into the login flows fit into the single sign-on flow that you currently have. For example, even after single sign-on, you might want to authenticate using a 2FA or a two-factor authentication, even after single sign-on. So you have a Windows Active Directory that is provisioning your users, but even though the users are using Windows Active Directory to log into Salesforce, you might want to send a text message to that user and then ask the user to put in the code that he got in the text message. You can set that scenario through the login flows, and then you can combine both the single sign-on as well as this login flows together, and it becomes really complex. Yeah.
So for our org, we do have single sign-on, but we use login flows to check to see if the user is accessing the Salesforce within the network, and if it's not, then we are doing the two-factor authentication using login flows. So you are able to use SSO and login flows together.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to give another minute or so for folks to ask any last-minute questions of Kartik, of his presentation, or any general process automation questions you might have. Question from Kimberly, can they have a lightning skin?
Yes, that's what the runtime is.
Deborah just commented, super helpful. I have several use cases for this login flow. Thank you. All right, last call for any additional questions. Raju is asking whether you'll post will you post login variables?
Yes. So we can do a blast, Jen. We can send the PDF, and I'll add the login variables that are available in the login flows, as well as the GitHub repo for the code.
Okay, great. All right, I am not seeing any other questions come through. Are there any additional resources?
Salesforce documentation. I mean, login flows are it's not a new concept. It's been there for a while now, at least like 2 to 3 years. Salesforce documentation is definitely a place where I would recommend you to go and go through and read through the login flows and the concepts and the capabilities of the login flows. That's what I've been using, and I don't know, Jen. Obviously, Automation R blog post and Jen's blog have some resources as well. So check those out. I think those should be very helpful.
Okay, I think that's it. So thanks so much, Kartik, for coming on and presenting for us with login flows, the 3 different use cases. And if folks, after we post information, if you have any additional questions, do post it out on our Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour. And with that, we will talk to you our next session, December 1st, with Megan Brodkey. Thanks so much.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.